Hi and welcome to the Service Virtualization Recipes Part 1. This episode is about keeping it simple. It is important to understand that the more complexity we introduce in our virtual services, the more time we have to spend developing them and the more maintenance issues we are going to face in the future. One of the common examples would be re-implementing real systems behavior. We need to remember about not doing that. An example would be an error response scenario. Let's look at a virtual service that validates an email address for us. We have our system under test and we have our virtual service. The system under test sends a request with an invalid email address to the virtual service. The virtual service validates that email address and fetches an invalid email address response, which it sends to the system under test. Please notice that there is logic in the virtual service that knows how to validate an email address. This is replicating the behavior of the real system. Another way to do the same thing would be to store the request to response match in a virtual service. So the system under test again sends a request with an invalid email address to that virtual service. The virtual service has a simple request to response matching, and it fetches the response for the invalid email address and then sends it to the system under test. Notice in this case there is no logic in the virtual service apart from a simple request to response matching. Let's look at another example, account balance scenario. We could implement it in at least two ways. One of them would be a stateful virtual service. We've got our system under test that sends a get imbalance account balance inquiry to the virtual service, which creates a session with default values, then gets the balance from that session and returns it to the system under test. That is $100 by default. Then the system under test increases the balance by $10. What the virtual service does is updates the balance in the session by $10 and returns a successful response. Then the system under test queries for the balance once again, and what the virtual service does is gets the balance from the session and returns it to the system under test. That is $110, which is 10 plus 100. Please notice in this case the virtual service is stateful and it knows how to update the balance on the account. Therefore it re-implements part of the real system's behavior. We could achieve the same thing looking from the system under test point of view using a virtual service that is stateless. What it would do is have a simple request to response matchings. For example, get account balance for account number 100, then the virtual service fetches the response for account number 100, which is an response with $100 in it. Then the system under test again transfers $10 to account number 100, and what the virtual service does, it returns a successful response. One could ask, what happens with the increasing balance? How do we test that the account balance was increased? The answer is, in this case, we don't, because it's not the system under test's point of view. If you would like to test, in this case, the increasing of the balance, we would have to extend the definition of the system under test to the real system that is, in this case, replicated by the virtual service Y. To wrap up, in this video we talked about how important it is to keep it simple. The 80-20 rule states that in our case of virtual services, 20% of the effort put into creating them and maintaining them would result in 80% of the benefits. Remember about picking the low-hanging fruit. Also, if you want to learn about breaking the rules and when it is appropriate to create complex virtual services, stay tuned for the next coming videos soon. If you enjoyed the video, please press the like button just below and subscribe to stay tuned for the next coming videos. Thank you very much.